Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. My name is Mitch Neff. I manage media marketing and comms for the Talos Communities Group. Thanks for joining us today, and we're very glad that you are here. Today, we are going to be talking about attackers in executive clothing, taking a closer look at business email compromise. And Nick Biasini is going to be joining us in just a second to take us through that. But first, we have to do some of the ubiquitous housekeeping for a live stream event like this. This is very dependent on you asking questions of us. We're going to save a good bit of time at the end for Q&A. So wherever you're watching the stream today on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitter, go ahead and drop a question right there for us. Our intrepid social editor, John, has infiltrated your chats and will be collecting those questions and bringing those to us here on the program so we can put those together and kind of ask them collectively together at the end. While you are watching on YouTube, Twitter, or LinkedIn, make sure to like, follow, subscribe, or whatever is available to you there so you can stay up to date on the latest content we're putting out, as well as any threat information and news threat stuff that we are putting out. So let's go ahead and get the stream started today. We have a lot of content to get through, and we want to save plenty of time for those questions at the end. So I am going to go ahead and turn the stream over to Nick Biasini, who is the leader of the North American Outreach Group here at Talos. So, Nick, go ahead and take it away for us.
Thanks again, everybody. My name again is Nick Biasini. I'm a threat researcher with Cisco Talos. And today I'm here to talk to you specifically about what we call attackers in executive clothing, or more specifically, business email compromise. Where I'm actually going to start, though, is not with business email compromise, but kind of where we are as an industry and the headlines that we're seeing. So as you've noticed over the last several months and years, we've seen a huge amount of ransomware attacks. And this is just a small smattering of what we've seen. And one of the biggest questions that we had was, well, how much money are these actors making? Because all indications are this is by a wide margin a very, very profitable business that's generating huge amounts of revenue. So we started doing a little digging. The statistics around it actually vary quite widely. One of the things that we did find, though, and this was actually one of the high numbers, was about $350 million earned in 2020 alone. And look, that's an extremely significant amount of money. I mean, that's more than most cyber criminals would hope to make in a lifetime. And that's what these groups are making in every single year. But it got us thinking a little bit more deeply about, well, what else is on the threat landscape that generates revenue? And how does this kind of stack up with that? Fortunately, the FBI Internet Cyber Crime Center, IC3, produces an annual report that kind of outlines what they've seen as far as revenue losses associated with threats. And we started digging into that for 2020. And the top line item completely blew me away. That's business email compromise, or EAC, which I believe is an email access compromise or email account compromise, is responsible for $1.8 billion in 2020 alone. Now think about that. $1.8 billion versus $350 million for what everyone considers to be the biggest threat that we face today. So that means that business email compromise is responsible for roughly 4 or 5 times the revenue and has a significantly lower barrier to entry. And we'll show you some of that in a bit. What I'm basically saying is business email compromise is a huge problem that really affects a wide swath of industries and really doesn't get the attention that it should. So let's start by talking about what is business email compromise? I always like to include this example because this was legitimately one of the most despicable examples I saw when I was going through my business email compromise research. This particular example is from a Fortune 50 company where they had an executive who was being impersonated, saying they were at a hospice, handing out gift cards, and were requesting gift card assistance from an employee. Now, this is just an example of the types of things that they do and the avenues that they're willing to go down. The biggest thing to remember about this, though, is this primarily relies on simple impersonation. This is primarily a social engineering attack more than anything else. The idea being they're going to impersonate someone and hopefully get you to give them some sort of money. The payment types and varieties vary quite widely, but the biggest and most common one that we see is the simplest: gift cards. Gift cards are very, very, very easy to monetize. There are a large amount of both legitimate and illicit marketplaces where you can quickly sell these gift cards, and it allows them to quickly turn around the monetization. And that's really where we see the majority of the activity lying. That's not to say there isn't far more sophisticated BEC campaigns that generate very significant losses, because they absolutely do. So let's spend a little time talking about, the three broad categories of examples, and then I'll kind of walk through some specific campaigns we saw for them. The first thing I'm going to talk to you about is what is the most common overall, which is basic BEC campaigns or business email compromise. These are extremely simplistic. They commonly are associated with gift cards. As far as what gift cards we see commonly asked for, the most common thing we see is gift cards for the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. Those are by far and away the most common, but it is not the only ones that we see. In our research, we saw examples looking for Amazon gift cards, PlayStation Store gift cards. There's a pretty wide array of gift cards that they are requesting. One of the key things to take away from this is they're not doing sophisticated spoofing for these. Most of the spoofing that we see is something as simple as attaching a name to an email address, and the name being the name of a director, a VP, a manager at an organization. They don't do more sophisticated things like compromise email accounts and use compromised credentials, or take over email accounts and do more sophisticated spoofing, even doing spoofing to make the email look like it's internal. We'll see some examples of that later on. These basic examples typically come from email addresses like lawfirm0865@gmail.com or executive director 84592 at Hotmail or at Outlook. These are not sophisticated attacks, but they are still extremely effective. You'll see some examples of that in a minute. Now, next tier up from that, we kind of have this tier of what I'll call intermediate campaigns. These are slightly more sophisticated. They do tend to focus more directly on money as opposed to asking for gift cards, which is a subtle change, but does drastically change the way that this threat is monetized and the types of infrastructure you have to have, right? Being able to take wire transfers and launder that money is far more difficult than taking stolen gift cards and selling it on a marketplace for a profit. Additionally, this is when you start to see a little more sophistication around the email infrastructure, right? This is where you see things like actor-owned domains start to becoming more prevalent. They're not using free email services. That's what you find in the overwhelming majority of the basic examples are accounts from places like Gmail, Yahoo, Outlook, Hotmail, all that stuff. You still see those email accounts being the primary vector for the basic campaigns. Now, one of the things we also see occasionally in the intermediate campaigns is the use of reply to. And this is something that's commonly used in marketing emails and promotional emails. Basically, it appears to come from one email address, but when you click the reply button, you're actually replying to a different email. In this case, it would look like it came from inside an organization or from a friendly organization. But when you click reply, you're actually sending an email to an actor-owned domain or to an actor-owned email address. I will say with the intermediate campaigns, they do tend to affect mid to larger size businesses more commonly. And honestly, it's more logical, right? You're trying to get things like wire transfers. And with the basic campaigns, we see them hit everything from small single restaurant businesses in cities in the US to Fortune 5 companies and everything in between. They cast a very, very, very wide net. With the intermediate campaigns, it's a little bit more focused, but it again is still wider than what we would see in the advanced campaigns. So the advanced campaigns have an extremely increased level of sophistication, and they are far less common for us to see. The majority of these involve the use of stolen credentials. And you can achieve that through a lot of ways. Things like phishing campaigns, they can take the data out of data breaches. They can do active exploitation and pull credentials that way. There's a wide variety of ways that they can gather these credentials. And once they have access, they then use that to leverage it in these attacks. So now your email does in fact originate from someone that you know because an actor owns the mailbox. This means that it will come from a trusted or potentially an internal account. These will almost exclusively rely on things like wire transfers and cash and can result in very, very significant losses. As you can imagine, these are far more difficult for us to detect. If a user owns the email inbox, it's very, very hard for you to differentiate between legitimate emails from that user and when an actor is sending emails asking for help illegitimately. And they do a bunch of other techniques to help lock people out. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So let's kind of walk through what these basic examples look like. This is a typical sample of one of the things that we see. These things basically have 4 or 5 pieces that can be split across multiple emails or be in a single email. In this particular instance, the actor was relatively nice and short and succinct and did all of them in one single email. So let's walk through them. The first is the most obvious. It's greetings and salutations. This is something that we'll see very, very commonly. And honestly, it's just a conversational starter. It's a way for them to get in the door and start the conversation. So you'll see things like, hey, how's it going? How are you doing? I need your help with something. Is there any chance you can get back to me? That is what we see most commonly as an initial email. In this case, they went much further. So they started with the salutations of, hey, hope you're doing well. I'm so sorry to bother you, but, and here comes the next part, the ask. The ask is the financial aspect of this, right? This is how they're trying to monetize the attack. In this particular instance, they're asking for a PlayStation gift card for their nephew for their birthday. Now, as I mentioned before, the types of gift cards can vary widely. In this particular campaign, they were going after PlayStation gift cards. Now, the next part of this, they can't just have an ask because most people immediately would say, no, I'm not doing that. Why? Why do you need me to go get you gift cards? And that is why they always include a reason. And these are always designed to pull on your heartstrings, to make you hesitate questioning something, and to make you feel sorry for the person you're doing the favor for. In this particular circumstance, it's almost like a multi-layered reason. So you have the fact that it was their birthday and that they promised them that they would get a gift card. And unfortunately, they can't take care of it right now because they're at a funeral, because a close friend of theirs died suddenly in a car wreck. And I can't get to it, so can you please help me out? Now, you can understand why they do this, right? This makes you pause. It makes you say, man, I feel really bad for this particular person and what happened to them. I'm going to try and do something to help them out. They've had a tough go of it. Let me do this one favor. Maybe it'll help them. Maybe it'll make their day. Maybe it'll help them feel better. It's human nature to want to help. And that's exactly what these people exploit. They're trying to go after your best nature, right? And additionally, one of the reasons why we always see in this example, it was an executive director sending emails to lower level random employees in the company. Now, that's another thing that we commonly see. And they're trying to take advantage of people potentially trying to get ahead at a company, right? They look at this and say, ooh, here's an opportunity for me to do a favor for someone way up the chain. They're going to remember that. And maybe down the road, they'll be able to help me out with a promotion, a raise, something that helps my standing in the company. And that is something that is very attractive to a lot of people. Now, the next thing that we will always see is a promise for reimbursement, because who is going to give them money for free? So what you commonly will see is after the reason, they'll say, oh, and don't worry, I'll reimburse you for all of this. Please let me know if you can help me. And look, they'll send a huge amount of these emails. And what they're waiting for is response. When they get response, they realize they potentially have someone on the hook. And trust me, this is not a one-time ask. I've seen these campaigns happen, unfortunately, where someone does go through the steps, send them these gift cards, and then the immediate response is, thank you so much. Hey, did you happen to see that other email? I need more. And they're going to keep going back to that well until you realize what's happening. And it's unfortunate. And in some cases, you're going to inflict pretty substantial losses from these actors doing this behavior. Now, it wouldn't be 2021 if I didn't address how COVID affected the business email compromise landscape. And it honestly had a pretty significant impact. So let's kind of walk through what we've seen. So this was the early version of what we saw. And in my opinion, this is a pretty ridiculous example. But again, during a pandemic, people not necessarily thinking as clearly as they should be. In this particular example, you have someone say, unfortunately, I tested positive for the coronavirus and I'm in isolation. I can't go do anything. Is there any chance you can go get me Amazon gift cards so that I can buy stuff? And honestly, on its face, it's a pretty ridiculous ask. If you have access to your phone and to email and you can send email, you likely can buy stuff on Amazon. Does COVID prevent you from being able to use credit cards? All of these things are questions that people should be asking. But again, in a time during a pandemic, they're going to use whatever they can to get people to give them money. Now, I said this is one of the early versions of this and a pretty basic example. Now I'm going to walk you through an actual real-world example of a business email compromise campaign that was leveraging COVID and how despicable these actors can get. So what it initially started with, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, the emails can be broken up into multiple emails, right? I said before, there's always those parts, right? Well, here's your initial email with your greeting and salutations. Hey, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? Are you safe? I need help via email. Can you help me out? They send this to an awful lot of people, waiting and hoping that some people will inevitably respond. And in this case, they did. And that is really when the attacker starts to activate. So here's a sanitized version of what the response looked like. And this is why COVID is such an effective lure, because when you ask people things like, hey, how are you doing? Are you safe? They immediately want to respond and tell them what's going on. And that's a combination of a variety of factors. You know, it could be social isolation. It could be them being excited about being vaccinated, just wanting to kind of really talk about what they've been doing. A lot of people really enjoy that. So in this particular circumstance, they responded and said, yes, we're both vaccinated and we're starting to do some things. And then the key part, I will do my best to help via email. That is what the BEC actor is waiting for. That lets them know that they potentially have someone on the hook and it is time to try and monetize it. And that is exactly what we saw. Another request, this time for Google Play gift cards. Also, oddly, to a nephew. But this one is where the COVID starts coming in. They say, hey, this nephew just had a heart operation. Not just that, but they lost both of their parents to COVID. And finally, I can't do it because I am elderly and I'm having a lot of health problems. I really need your help. Please do this. I need it. I need it badly. And you can start to understand how this can play to people, right? If they have a friend who is elderly, who has had problems with this becomes something that hits them more personally, right? If you have an elderly family member that struggles with this stuff and you want to help them out, this is where the problems start to arise. So they immediately respond after that, after another response saying, thank you. Here's what I need. And this is actually something that we see all the time in these gift card campaigns is they say, hey, I need around X number of hundreds of dollars in $100 increments. And I need you to do this very specific thing, which is I need you to get the gift cards, open them up, scratch off the codes, take photos of them and email them to me. Now, the reason they are doing that is because that's how you sell the gift card. You can't use the gift card unless you have that data. So what they're basically doing is saying, Take a picture of the gift card, send it to me so I can quickly turn around and sell it on an illicit or legitimate marketplace. And look, it doesn't take long to monetize gift cards, right? If you're offering a $100 gift card for $50, you're going to have people buying them hand over fist trying to get you to buy them. That is exactly what these adversaries want. They're not trying to get face value. They're just trying to get cash. And if you're doing tens of thousands of dollars in gift cards, even getting half the money is extremely, extremely attractive. So let's talk more generally about the ways that we've seen COVID used in business email compromise campaigns. The biggest one and the most common one is conversational, right? It's a way to start a conversation, just like we've seen with every other threat. If there is a topic that is top of mind for almost everyone on the planet, you're going to have a large amount of malicious actors follow that lure. And look, it's not specific to cyberspace, right? We see threats in cyberspace doesn't mean we don't see umpteen scams and everything else in the real world, all tied around the same thing. But from a business email compromise perspective, the biggest advantage it has is it is a great conversation starter. It is very easy to get people talking when you say, hey, I just had a scare with COVID. I thought I was going to get it. How have you been doing? Have you had any problems? You are going to immediately get responses from people because people want to talk about this. Oh man, I did have COVID. I didn't have COVID. I'm vaccinated. I'm not vaccinated. Here's what I'm doing now. Here's what I was doing before. All of these are avenues for attackers. These people are largely just scammers, right? They're trying to social engineer you out of money, and they're going to use any mechanism at their disposal to do that. Right now, COVID-19 is a very, very attractive way to do this. So conversational is one of the most common ways that we see BEC used. We also see it as more of task-related things, right? Where you have a person who is sick or is quarantining or has been exposed and they're unable to do it. Or, hey, I really need to get these gift cards, but I'm stuck at home because I was exposed to someone with COVID. Can you go out and help me? My friend or relative tested positive and I'm having some really hard times. Can you help them out or help me out? These are the types of things that we see, or even more. I'm helping someone who tested positive and I can't leave. Can you help me? Again, using it to try and get you to commit to the task. And then finally, you see a large amount of sympathy plays around COVID as well. That's like the example that I showed you where you have a kid who lost both of their parents, or I lost my significant other to COVID, or I lost my parent, or I lost my child. I am unable to leave the house. I'm distraught. I'm going to a funeral for a dear friend who died of COVID. Those types of things are very, very common. And again, it's all designed to manipulate people. And that's really what the goal is here. Manipulate you into paying them money that they don't want or need or deserve by impersonating with varying levels of sophistication a person that you would want to help, whether that be a colleague, a supervisor, an owner, a manager, someone important that you know of that you're willing to help. So let's talk about kind of the hallmarks of these basic BEC campaigns. So they are not sophisticated. And look, this is kind of pointing to a larger issue here. The reason why BEC is so prevalent and so widespread is it has basically no barrier to entry. Think about it related to things like malware campaigns and distributing malware, right? If you're going to distribute malware, you have to have infrastructure for distribution. You need to handle things like command and control. You need to be able to distribute your malware, deal with cleanups, maintain access. There's a lot of parts to this, and it's not something that the average person is going to walk into. This requires you to be able to sign up for free email services, as they will almost always be using free email services, and the ability for you to do searching on the internet, looking for names that people will recognize. I have a good example of this from the research I was doing. One of the campaigns I was running down, I found an email sample that was destined for a small restaurant in the Midwest. And it had a very specific name attached to it. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd. It's a small restaurant and there's a very specific name. So I started doing a little research into the restaurant and the email address, and I found the website for that particular restaurant. On that website, you literally had the text for the email address, and right above it was a header that had owner, the person's name. Shockingly, that was the name of the person that was sending the email. So you can see they're doing research down to individual restaurants in the Midwest, or using scripts that are able to scrape this information. But still, if they're targeting single restaurants in the Midwest of the United States, you know that large corporations are getting targeted a lot, because that is a far easier thing. Use LinkedIn, use, all of the tools that are out there, the company's own website, start to identify the important executives and potential employees as targets. These are all things that these BEC actors are doing. And this is at the lowest level of sophistication. These emails are flowing constantly all the time. I'm willing to bet that most of you have seen one at one point or another, because they can be relatively difficult to completely block. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But before we get too far into that, let's talk a little bit more about some of the more sophisticated campaigns I found during my research. And this is where you can start to see some of the more advanced techniques that these actors are doing. Let's start with the acquisition-based campaign that I found. This is actually a pretty long-running campaign. It's been going now for probably close to a year. However, I don't really see it being very high volume. It's kind of like a few emails trickle out periodically every week. One of the things that I always like to call out first, and in this campaign is very important, there is some consistency to the campaigns, and that is the subject line. So throughout this entire campaign, they have used the word project followed by another word or acronym that would be like a code word or an acronym around an acquisition. So in this case, Project Violet. That's one of the first and most common things you'll see about it. The subject of the email will almost always be around business acquisitions, like, hey, we're targeting a distressed company. One of the other things that we see is that this is one of the first campaigns where we saw actor-owned domains being more widely used. You can see here, trustnet-gateway.cc is an actor-owned domain. Now, the actual from appears to be coming from inside the organization. Now, this is one of the places where some things like email tagging can be incredibly effective. So one thing that we'll commonly see organizations do is start to tag external emails. So if you received this email, despite it saying it came from inside the organization, it would have a tag on it telling you it doesn't. And maybe that gives you the pause necessary to stop this attack and to stop pursuing it. Now, one of the other things that we've seen, and we're starting to see this more and more, is these actors don't rely on email. This is a phone-based social engineering attack. It's basically, hey, we have a person who is handling this, and he wants to get in touch with you today. Please assist him in whatever he needs. And shockingly, I'm going to guess that involves you giving him money. But what they're going to do is ask for a phone number to call you at, and they're going to call you and social engineer money out of you. This is what they do. And it makes it even harder, right? You have someone on the phone, that makes it even more likely for you to do this, especially, I don't know if any of you have gone to the social engineering talks and presentations and stuff at places like DEF CON, but people that do this can do it very, very convincingly and very well. And once you have someone on the phone that is willing to help you, it is even easier to achieve your goals. And that's why we see these types of escalations going on. So let's kind of talk about an overview of what we saw. As I said before, it is a very, very long running campaign. It has been going on for a long time. Now, that isn't to say it's very high volume. It is not. There is only, 10, 15 emails a month that come out that we've seen associated with this activity. They do use spoofed sending, so it looks like it's coming from inside the organization, but it is not. They do continue that consistent subject line where it's project plus the keyword or the acronym. Like I said before, Project Violet, that type of stuff. Because this is around acquisitions of smaller companies, it does tend to only target larger companies. And I've seen this involved in law firms and various other things as well, consulting companies. There's lots of avenues that they can move this attack through, but they do tend to be larger organizations because there is, as I said, you have actor-owned domains, which means you have to maintain your own email and maintain communication and the OPSEC associated with that. It definitely is indicative of a more sophisticated attack and therefore more cost. So they're going to want more monetary return. And then finally, it is a social engineering phone-based attack in the end. So what will happen is it'll start via email through business email compromise and then move to the phone. And this is something that organizations really need to be aware of because we are starting to see more and more of this technique where actors are using phones and voice to compromise these victims, not just relying on email anymore. Okay, now let's walk through yet another campaign that we saw. This one was actually kind of interesting. And for people that work in tech, which I would assume would be basically all of us watching today, something that all of us are aware of, support contracts. So anybody who's bought software, hardware, anything like that is keenly aware of support contracts. This is basically how you maintain your support for said technology. That's how you open support tickets. That's how you report failures, bugs, that kind of stuff. All of that is done through support contracts that you have to pay at some regular interval, usually annually, every other year, depends on the contract, right? So what we saw was a campaign that the subject line, the end of the subject line was consistent. It ended in support request. Now, the initial part was related to the company that they were fictitiously asking for support from. What we did find was we found a pretty wide array of different companies that were spoofed. It wasn't like one particular software company or hardware company or anything like that. They were kind of handling a wide array of different types of technologies. Now, one key thing to note here is in all the examples that we found, we noticed that the cash payout request, they were also asking for money directly. Obviously, you can't pay for a support contract with gift cards. And if you could, that would be a red flag. But they were asking specifically for euros and pounds. We couldn't find any example of US dollars being asked for. So this implies that this is potentially an attack that was targeting Europe specifically, with the British pound and the euro being the primary monetary avenues for payout. These are significant financial asks. You can see in the example here, they asked for almost 3,000 euro. That is a whole heck of a lot different than asking for $500 in gift cards, and honestly should give pause to a lot of organizations. And just like all the other ones, they have the details of the ask, the reason, they're currently, the treasurer is indisposed. They're at some meeting for the company and they can't do it. Can you help them out? And we really did. We saw a lot of organizations targeted, including things like nonprofits, which is just awful. But again, this is the type of attack that you're going to see. And these people are choosing an avenue that is extremely effective. You have a lot of accounts payable departments that are very used to making support contract payments. And by creating fictitious ones, it's very possible that you're going to get these actors or these people to give you significant amounts of money. And that's why they do it. This attack type is not very sophisticated, requires very basic understanding, and can result in thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in return. This is why we say that BEC is such a huge problem. Now, look, this is something that I always like to call out. I showed you a couple of campaigns. That is but a drop in the bucket to what's out there from business email compromise. This isn't something that's super easy to detect. These actors in a lot of cases are taking over email accounts and sending emails from legitimate email accounts that they currently have access to. And, this kind of gives me an opportunity to talk about why data breaches are such a big deal. This is something that people don't always realize is they're like, oh, whatever, data breach, some passwords and usernames were compromised. It's just another data breach. You have to realize that people reuse passwords, and the account that everybody doesn't expect is the most valuable, right? Everybody thinks, oh God, I can't compromise my bank credentials. That would be awful. They would have access to my bank. But what people don't think about is email gives you access to everything. Say you go to said bank and you forget your password. How do you reset it? Oh, they send you an email, right? That you click. What happens when the actor owns your email address? These are the problems that come into this. And if they own your email, you better believe they're going through your sent emails and looking for people you respond with regularly. Those are going to be the easiest targets for them to get payouts. This is a very difficult problem, unfortunately, and is one that requires a lot of different types of ways to defend against it. So let's spend a little time talking about ways that you can defend about this. One of the key things I want to emphasize is there is no single solution to this. It is going to be some hybridized version of technology and human education. There's really no way to get around it. The things you can do from a technology perspective, most of this lies on your email gateways like Cisco Secure Email, that kind of stuff. You can do things like I mentioned earlier, tagging all external emails. Now, this is noisy, and depending on your organization, may result in an awful lot of tagging, depending on what you do. And also really needs to go along with some education, because just adding a tag and not explaining it to your users is just going to result in them ignoring the tag or not understanding why it's there. You can do things like hunting for BEC emails or enabling some BEC protections, right? There's a couple of different BEC protections that you can do. Even in the Cisco Secure Email, you have advanced phishing protections that provide you that extra protection. But again, hunting for those in your own telemetry is probably a good idea. Looking for those key phrases. Hey, I need a favor. Hey, I need your help. Can I email you? Those types of things, although they may be noisy, are a way for you to get a handle on what's going on. But by far and away, the biggest thing you can do is educate your users on how to do this or how to defend against it and detect it. Now, without a doubt, the most important thing you can do as someone who receives these emails, verify out of band. What I mean by that is contact them through other means. So if they sent you an email, pick up the phone, give them a call, but do not have them call you because they will do that. Instead, reach out, call them on the phone, send them a message through whatever messaging system you have at work. Figure out a way if you can text them. Anything you can do to say, hey, did you just send me this request? Something as simple as that will really, really make a massive impact on this type of behavior. Because you really do. Doing something as simple as that will expose potentially that the email account has been compromised or that you're receiving a BEC attempt. And look, that is one of the biggest challenges, right? They can compromise legitimate email accounts. So just responding via email doesn't really help. They may own the mailbox as well. And the other side of this is one of the biggest reasons this is so successful is because this happens all the time. You have higher ups asking people for help with things like this for various purposes. It could be legitimate, right? You could be doing a handout of gift cards to employees. Hey, I need you to pick me up $500 in gift cards because we're doing a handout later to our employees. That's completely legitimate, but do it from your email address. Don't do it from your personal email. Corporate emails should use corporate email. That is a great way to help blunt a lot of this, right? Don't send these types of requests from your own personal Gmail account. Send them from your official corporate account. That at least will help. And again, do that verification as an end user. Make sure they are the ones sending these requests. If they're asking for cash and it's out of the ordinary, you definitely should question it. Even if it is ordinary and it seems like an odd request, make sure you validate before you're in a circumstance where bad things happen and your company's out thousands or tens of thousands of dollars in some of these circumstances. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick it back to everybody and we can take on some questions. I hope you all have some good ones. Thanks a lot.
All right, Nick. I want to thank you for that presentation. First of all, I think that was definitely interesting and enlightening, especially for a lot of the audience today. We've gotten a few questions coming in. I do want to remind everybody that if you're watching on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, wherever you are, just go ahead and send your questions in now. John is out in the chats; he's collecting those and sending them back. We have a few that have come in already. One of them is actually one of the first questions that I kind of had on this. I think this is more from a logistical perspective, and it was asking how much has activity in the Beck space changed over the work from home hybrid era? Like, have the logistics of that made it more of a plausible attack, or has there been an uptick in any way?
I don't know as though working from home has had a huge impact. Obviously, COVID has had a massive impact because there's a ton of theming around it. But this activity is pretty prevalent. Even if you go back to 2019, 2018, this was making a significant amount of money. It may be that more people are flocking to it, but I haven't noticed like a significant uptick due to work from home.
Yeah, and another one that just came in. So this one's, I think, a little bit more nuanced, so you might have to consider a few different scenarios. I think anytime somebody asks a question on a specific scenario, it's hard to assume all the details. So we may have to approach this one a couple different ways. But this person had seen a business email compromise campaign that was targeting an employee's personal email address, presumably on a company matter, from the way the question is asked. So I think this person asked, where do attackers usually find the personal email addresses of employees? How would that happen? And what is this? I mean, is it through social networks? Is it other data dumps? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that they can go about gathering that data. If you go onto some place like doing social media is a key way. Getting people reusing their usernames, like using the same username they have at work as they have on their personal email addresses. In data dumps, there's large amounts of email address lists that are circulated amongst spammers. There's a lot of ways that people could do that. You could even look for password reuse and say, oh, I found 5 different accounts that use the same password that have the same username. I bet they have a personal email account that uses the same thing and has the same username as well. And sure enough, a lot of times that's how they'll obtain those types of things as well.
Well, and I would presumably, like you said, with email effectively being the keys to the kingdom for so many things. If a personal email address is compromised, sorting out a social profile and figuring out where they work is yeah, it's pretty trivial from there, isn't it? I guess.
Yep, the email address holds a lot of value. People don't really appreciate how much access and things can be done with having nothing more than just access to your email inbox.
That's pretty amazing. We have one more question here, and if you have any other questions, make sure to get those into the chats now. We're still collecting those. So this viewer asks, we can take measures to protect our firm, but authorized vendors who make payments on behalf of the organizations are also victims to Beck campaigns, and that loss ends up on the organization's account. So I guess the question is, there's what can we do about our third party vendors and things that are doing business in our organization to, I guess, another step of abstraction to protect the company from that a third party back attack.
And it's a good question. It's a little bit tough. One of the things that you can do is put in guardrails of some sort or additional verification steps, right? Make sure that for any purchase over X dollars, they need to send a confirmation to someone before they do it. Those are the types of things, unfortunately, that you'd have to introduce. Because if you do give someone, the ability to make payments regardless of size with no verification, it is very likely that these BEC actors will find them eventually and leverage it for a significant payout potentially.
Fantastic. That is actually all the questions we had in the queue. Nick, do you have any closing thoughts that you wanted to leave everybody with before we sign off today?
Just this research was actually really interesting. As someone who spends most of my time focusing on malware and malware campaigns, it was kind of interesting to look at the social side of this, and the amount of revenue that these adversaries are generating is just astronomical. I mean, if you're not paying attention to this space, you should be, because your organization is likely already being impacted by it, and it's just going to get worse.
As things tend to do. I mean, who would have known working in the security community that our scathing distrust of everything would once again be proven absolutely correct? I don't. And so strange. That's, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you do have any questions, use those social links you're viewing on today. Ask them there. Send us a tweet. We'll be sure to get that back. The recording of this up and available soon, so that you can review it or send that to your friends and family. Uh, and that is going to do it. Thank you once again, Nick, and we will see you next time on our Talos Threat live streams.